Alright, strap in because we're diving into one of the most underrated but critical wins in the American Revolution, the Battle of Princeton. Picture this. It's the dead of winter, January 3rd, 1777, and George Washington is pulling off some serious 4D chess moves on the British. Just days after his daring attack on Trenton, Washington's up against the clock, with the British hot on his heels. But instead of retreating, he's got a bold plan in mind, one that could turn the tide of the entire war. This isn't just any battle, though. The Continental Army is tired, short on supplies, and morale has been hanging by a thread. If Washington pulls this off, it's going to show that the Americans aren't just here to fight, they're here to win. So what went down that frosty January morning in Princeton? Let's dig in. Alright, so before we get into the clash itself, let's rewind and see how Washington and his troops ended up at Princeton. We're coming off the heels of the Battle of Trenton on December 26, 1776. Washington had just surprised the Hessian forces, giving the Continental Army a much-needed morale boost. But the British weren't going to just let that slide. General Charles Cornwallis is sent down with reinforcements to crush Washington and put an end to this rebel nonsense. Washington, knowing Cornwallis is coming, decides to keep his men on the move. He realizes that sitting still is as good as handing himself over, so he orders his army to keep moving and harassing the British. As night falls on January 2, 1777, Cornwallis's troops close in on Washington's position near Trenton. Cornwallis is confident, even saying, "We've got the old fox in a trap." But little does he know, Washington's about to pull a Houdini-level escape right under his nose. So it's the night of January 2nd, and Washington's got a risky plan in mind. Instead of facing Cornwallis in a direct fight, he decides to leave a small group behind to keep the campfires burning and make noise, creating the illusion that the Continental Army is still there. Meanwhile, Washington and the bulk of his men sneak away under the cover of darkness and head toward Princeton, where a smaller British force is stationed. By the time dawn breaks on January 3rd, Washington's army is closing in on Princeton. They're spotted by a British patrol, and the fighting kicks off. Washington's men run into British troops under Colonel Charles Mawhood, and things get intense fast. At first, the British are holding their ground and it looks like Washington's troops might get overrun, but Washington isn't about to back down. He rides to the front lines, rallying his men and leading a charge that turns the tide of the fight. The battle becomes a chaotic clash through the fields and the streets of Princeton. Washington's troops fight with everything they've got, and after some fierce resistance, they manage to push the British back. By mid-morning, Princeton is in American hands, and the remaining British forces retreat. Washington's gamble has paid off in a big way. This wasn't just a tactical win, it was a massive morale boost for the American cause. The victories at Trenton and Princeton back-to-back showed that the Continental Army could not only survive, but could also take on the British and win. Washington's daring maneuvers and leadership gave his troops the confidence they desperately needed. And it wasn't just the soldiers who felt the impact. Word of the victory spread like wildfire, and suddenly, people who had been on the fence about supporting the revolution started to believe that maybe, just maybe, these scrappy colonies could actually stand up to the British Empire. Enlistment surged, and new recruits came pouring in, inspired by Washington's boldness and the renewed hope for independence. The Battle of Princeton was more than just a win, it shifted the momentum of the war. Washington had shown that his army could outmaneuver the British, throwing Cornwallis's forces off balance. The British realized they couldn't take the Continental Army lightly, or expect them to roll over and surrender. Washington's success forced the British to rethink their strategy, realizing they were dealing with a resilient and resourceful opponent. This victory also allowed Washington's army to regroup, move into winter quarters, and plan their next moves. Princeton and Trenton essentially turned the Revolutionary War from a series of British victories into a long, drawn-out struggle, with the Americans proving they could fight on their own terms. Today, the Battle of Princeton is remembered as a defining moment in American history, a battle that showcased George Washington's brilliance as a military leader and the grit of the Continental Army. The image of Washington at Princeton, riding into battle with his men, has become a symbol of courage, resilience, and unyielding determination. This battle is a reminder that sometimes, The biggest risks bring the biggest rewards. Washington's willingness to defy the odds and take the fight to the British is a lesson in leadership, in standing strong even when the world seems against you. It's about knowing when to make bold moves and when to hold your ground, and it's a story that continues to inspire generations of Americans. So, what's the big takeaway from the Battle of Princeton? It's this: sometimes when the odds are stacked against you, that's when you've got to be boldest. Washington's risky nighttime maneuver and his daring charge at Princeton weren't just about winning a single battle. They were about reigniting the hope and belief that freedom was worth fighting for. The Battle of Princeton is a story of courage, strategy, and the power of resilience. It's a reminder that with determination and a bit of ingenuity, even the most daunting challenges can be overcome. And in the end, that spirit was what kept the revolution alive and paved the way for American independence.